By the late 1920s, American studios were experimenting heavily with visual style. German Expressionism had crossed the Atlantic through imported films and immigrant artists, and Hollywood was eager to integrate stylized lighting, atmospheric sets, and new camera movements into familiar genres. Mystery plays, particularly those involving eccentric families and creaking mansions, offered a convenient foundation for filmmakers who wanted to explore these techniques without abandoning audience expectations for humor and suspense. The movie I'm covering this week is not the strongest film we've covered so far, but it earns its place for the way it blends comedy and horror while borrowing visual strategies from Expressionist predecessors. It's a film that doesn't necessarily achieve everything it attempts, yet the attempt itself shaped some of the stylistic language Universal Pictures would rely on in the years to come. Welcome to the Cinematic Century Chronicle, and this is The Cat and the Canary. This video contains spoilers. If you haven't seen the film, I recommend pausing here, watching it, and returning when you're ready. Released in 1927 and adapted from John Willard's successful 1922 stage play, The Cat and the Canary follows a group of relatives summoned to a decaying mansion on the 20th anniversary of Cyrus West's death. The premise uses what would become hallmarks of the old dark house tradition: an eccentric will, a suspicious gathering, and a night in which hidden motives begin to surface. Universal approached the film not just as a mystery, but as an opportunity to showcase atmosphere. The first images inside the mansion focus on its shadows and long corridors, giving the space a quiet tension before the story even begins. Curtains shift in unseen drafts, hallways stretch toward darkness, and architectural details appear slightly exaggerated, shaping an environment that feels deliberately unstable. The house communicates that the film's tension will come as much from the environment as from the characters within it. The inheritance scenario brings together a cast of sharply differentiated personalities: relatives who haven't seen each other in decades, lawyers guarding secrets, and house staff who seem to know more than they say. The play's theatrical structure remains visible, but the film adapts it through a cinematic lens, allowing atmosphere to drive tension. This blend of stage mechanics and visual experimentation made the project a natural fit for a director with strong design instincts. Universal found that in Paul Leni, who had recently arrived from Germany and brought with him a sensibility that balanced stylization with accessible entertainment. Paul Leni began his career in Germany as a painter, illustrator, and stage designer before moving into film direction. His work on waxworks displayed an interest in expressive environments, spaces where architecture signaled emotional states and lighting shaped movement. Universal recruited him in 1926, recognizing that his expressionist training could strengthen the studio's growing interest in atmospheric, visually driven productions. Leni's expressionist background didn't manifest as overt distortion in The Cat and the Canary, but it influenced the film's entire visual strategy. Angled shadows, graphic compositions, and sculpted pools of light form an aesthetic bridge between European expressionism and American studio filmmaking. Leni's experience as a designer also shaped how the camera moved. Rather than relying solely on static setups inherited from the stage, he incorporated gliding shots that guide attention without drawing focus to the technique itself. One of the most distinctive aspects of the film is how the mansion's architecture participates in the storytelling. The house feels porous, filled with sliding panels, concealed corridors, and doors that open just a moment too slowly. Leni uses these details as structural elements that allow scenes to expand and contract around the characters. A recurring motif involves characters framed within doorways or hallways, where vertical lines isolate them against the surrounding darkness. Even comedic beats rely on the house's spatial logic. Paul Jones, played by Crichton Hale, navigates the mansion with a nervous energy that mirrors the camera's hesitations, pausing at corners, glancing back toward open doorways, and moving tentatively through rooms that seem too large for comfort. His reactions highlight the scale of the space while also providing contrast to the darker sequences. The ensemble in The Cat and the Canary works like a lineup of sharply defined personalities, each one tuned to a slightly different tone. Together, they create the kind of lively group dynamic that later ensemble mysteries would refine. Stories built around eccentric behavior, quick reactions, and exaggerated interpersonal rhythms. Laura LaPlante anchors the film as Annabelle West, blending warmth and uncertainty in a way that fits Leni's shifting mood. Her performance moves easily between sincerity and light humor, giving the film a steady center even when the tone drifts toward theatricality. Crichton Hale leans into physical comedy, playing Paul Jones with a nervous charm that keeps scenes active. Forrest Stanley plays Charles Wilder with a measured confidence that steadies the group during tense moments. Tully Marshall's sharp-edged lawyer and Martha Maddox's imposing housekeeper contribute a different kind of pressure. Each holds a key piece of information, and their presence shapes how the story releases those details. Leni uses this range of energy to keep the film balanced, allowing suspense and comedy to coexist without pulling the film in separate directions. The events of The Cat and the Canary unfold entirely after dark, and the film uses that uninterrupted nighttime setting to shape its atmosphere. Leni leans into the stillness of the hour, deep shadows at the edges of hallways, narrow beams of light catching faces, and pockets of darkness that seem to shift as characters move through the mansion. One of the strongest examples comes when Annabelle sleeps in her bedroom as a concealed panel begins to slide open behind her. She is framed in light, surrounded by darkness, and for a moment the composition resembles an expressionist still photograph, balanced between calm and dread. When a hand emerges through the opening, the timing creates a soft, lingering tension that holds just long enough to unsettle the moment. Leni carries this visual playfulness into the film's superimpositions, a technique he uses to shape both mood and tone throughout the story. Some of the most memorable examples appear before the narrative even begins. The opening introduces the mansion through a series of layered images. The house dissolves over empty bottles, and Cyrus West materializes inside them, surrounded by ghostly cats circling the frame. The effect feels theatrical and mischievous, setting the tone for a mystery that treats its imagery with a sense of play. Later, during the will reading sequence, the inner workings of a clock appear over the assembled relatives, giving the moment a mechanical stop-and-start tension as everyone waits for Cyrus's final instructions. Leni returns to the technique in smaller flourishes, a skull briefly appearing over Paul's terrified face, or an oversized hand superimposed during a knock at the door, each one adding an ornamental touch that matches the film's mix of humor and suspense. The film arrived at a moment when the studio was increasingly interested in stylization, a direction that would become central to Universal's output in the decade ahead. One of Paul Leni's follow-ups, The Last Warning, continued exploring theatrical spaces shaped by expressionist design. His time in Hollywood proved brief. Leni died in 1929 at just 44, reportedly from sepsis brought on by an untreated tooth infection. Despite directing only 4 films for Universal, his influence on the studio's visual identity was immediate. After his death, Universal moved into its early 1930s horror cycle, producing films like Dracula, Frankenstein, and The Old Dark House. While The Cat and the Canary is not the definitive Old Dark House film, it occupies a transitional space. It connects stage traditions with expressionist imagery and early studio aesthetics, forming a visual template that Universal would expand and refine in the years that followed. Next time on Cinematic Century Chronicle, we'll continue through 1927 and explore Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, a film that redefined visual storytelling through expressionist lighting, mobile framing, and emotional imagery. Subscribe and join me as we continue to chronicle 100 years of film, one story at a time. Until next time, have a great rest of your day.